My least favorite character in all of Resident Evil, no, in all of gaming, is by far Jake Mueller from Resident Evil 6. Now, Resident Evil 6 in and of itself is a game that is not very popular. Not many people really like it. I don't personally hate it. I think the game is quite enjoyable if you're playing with your friends, which, of course, I just forgot that would require you to have friends, right? But Jake is just sort of someone who is not very likable. If you meet someone and they tell you that they like Jake Mueller, they're probably liars. Or they're just like Jake Mueller, so you should probably avoid them altogether. So Jake, of course, appears in Resident Evil 6. He appears throughout Leon's and Chris campaigns, but he also gets his own campaign, which I think is the first bigger problem with him. His companion in his campaign is Sherry from Resident Evil 2, who went on and became an agent, of course following in Leon's steps. And I think if you're gonna have Sherry there, why not just make it her campaign? She would deserve it far more than Jake. To be like sort of the main character of a campaign. And the whole ordeal of Jake's campaign is basically that he has special blood because he's the son of Albert Wesker. So they need his blood to cure a virus, but I don't really think that necessarily he had to be the main character of the campaign. I think it could have been Sherry just like looking for him. And that'd be the main story, and it would have been a lot better than what we actually got with Jake. I think what the idea was with this character was basically that he would be the lead of the franchise from now on, as Chris and Leon and the others were getting older. This didn't really go anywhere, thank God. As Jake did get like a post-credit scene teasing his return, but thankfully he never returned yet, and hopefully he never will. Right from the beginning of his own campaign, it's established that Jake is very much a product of his time, and by that I mean the game came out in like 2012, and this was a very edgy era of gaming, to say at least. Jake, right from the get-go, is pretty snarky and very misogynistic.
It's always something with women!
He disrespects everyone around him, including Chris, Piers, and Leon. And while you could also say that other Resident Evil protagonists, especially Leon, has that kind of a snarky attitude, with Leon it sort of feels earned. Because as we know from Resident Evil 2, he was not always like this. We actually seen Leon's journey to how he became what he is. He's severely traumatized, so him being cynical towards things is sort of understandable. But he has more sides to him. When shit gets real, Leon does take things seriously and he cares about his companion, as we could have seen with Ashley or Helena. Jake sort of cares about Sherry, but not really. Jake caring about Sherry seems something that the plot is trying to sell, but I don't really remember them having a moment where he would genuinely care about her well-being outside of like their final scene together. And that still doesn't really change how Jake treated everyone else around him, even like the characters that are actually trying to help him, like Leon and Chris. And I guess I do understand what they were trying to do with him, to give him like that sort of a Wesker feel to him, but that doesn't really work because Jake is not supposed to be an antagonist. It works with Wesker because he's obviously evil and you're not supposed to root for him, which sort of makes him charismatic, even though when you actually start to think about what he's saying and what he's doing, it really makes him look goofy.
Greetings. You must be the lovely Claire Redfield.
But such protagonists only work in certain stories, usually in comedies. And Jake is definitely not written to be that way. The game wants you to like him, but makes it impossible to do so. It's not impossible to make your protagonist be sort of bad and still likable, which dives into the anti-hero territory. The protagonist can still oftentimes be selfish and still likable, but in the instances they are actually selfish, it should be justifiable from at least their point of view. Most of the times, Jake is just being an asshole for no reason. What makes the Jake situation even worse is that he's being a complete nuisance to character that we actually know and like and we have known for years at that point. I mean, think about it that way. Whose side would you take in the conflict between Chris and Jake, or Leon and Jake? You would obviously take Leon and Chris. And this is exactly what happens. Jake's rudeness towards Chris and Leon appears very unjustified, or rather unearned. I mean, you cannot just expect me to like a character who appears out of nowhere and just ruins everything for everyone. The worst thing is Jake never even acknowledges or apologizes to neither Chris or Leon. I mean, Pierce, who was also introduced in the same game and is a far better character than him, straight up fucking died because of him, because he was saving him. And there's nothing from Jake about that. He never acknowledges it. He never reaches out to Chris. He doesn't do anything. Jake comes across as a fucking brat in that whole situation. Like, he feels entitled to the help from Chris just because Chris killed his father, who was not even in his life at all. If he had at least thanked Chris in like a post-credit scene or something for saving his life, then I think that would make Jake immediately more likable. I mean, don't get me wrong, it'd still be pretty shit, but you know, it'd be at least something. You could say the same thing about Pierce. Like, at the beginning of the game, he's all up in Chris's shit at the bar. But if you did say that, I think you are genuinely fucking stupid. First of all, Pierce was in the right in that situation. Second of all, the confrontation between Pierce and Chris comes from Pierce actually being worried about Chris because he looks up to him. To him, Chris is a fucking hero. I mean, he says all that in that very same scene. And third of all, throughout the entire game, Pierce actually proves himself that he's loyal and he respects Chris. He literally gives his life for Chris. I mean, why am I even making that comparison? Everyone with 2 brain cells know that Pierce is far better character and a person than Jake. Quite obviously, Resident Evil 6 was setting up Jake being like a very prominent character in the series from that point on. It ended up being his first and last appearance, which sort of makes sense because not many characters from Resident Evil 6 made it to any future installments. I mean, the only ones that would make sense for them to appear later would be Helena and Jake. But nobody wants to see Jake again, and Helena is sort of just there. She doesn't really have anything to do anymore. I mean, I'd love to see her again, but I don't think that's ever gonna happen. Gameplay wise, Jake is okay. He's not really remarkable or anything, but he's not very terrible to play as when you take away the fact that he's a fucking piece of shit. His campaign is not even really that bad. It has some interesting locations, like for example that snow level or their level in China. As I said before, if Jake had not been the main character in that campaign, but it was Sherry or someone completely different, it would have been far more bearable. I've been rambling about Jake for a while now and I'm not even sure if any of this is coherent. I didn't really have a script, I just went with it as I recorded it. Anyway, that was my reasoning why Jake Mueller is the worst character in fiction. So don't forget to like and watch my other videos and subscribe, because if you don't, Jake Mueller will literally come to your house. Like, he will literally be standing in your door